Alright, we are live, and we're going to watch some videos today, and this one's going to cut the line. I got a line of videos to watch, and I started watching this one. I was outside breaking up boxes for the recycle, and I started hearing this one, and I said, you know what? The content, right? The content, though. So I paused it. Only got through about basically the intro, about 2 minutes or so. So we're going to watch this one. It's brand new from Ian, and we're going to hear what she has to say. What are her writing hot takes? And I hope that we have some differences of opinion here, just because that makes some better content, right? When we disagree, and we can talk about that rather than me just going, yeah, that makes sense, yep. So let's see what she's got.
Hello, boomers. My name is not Yanananana. Actually, I am Ian KirkpattieCake, author, robot, loin streamer, and today I'm wearing the safety glasses because
that music
we're going
sounded
to
like
have some, how you say, hot takes.
Breath of the Wild for a second.
Yes.
Like,
and in case you didn't know, today I am mildly dressed like my character, Yanananana, from my hit prophetic novel, Boom Boom Boom, available at all of your favorite retailers if you're curious about this outfit. Actually, I had this shirt, which you can sort of see, in my closet before I wrote the book, and then when I wrote the book, I gave him the shirt, as you can somewhat see right here.
Boom, there it is.
I freaking love that he wears a little pink shirt in the book. Anyway. Hello everybody, my name is Ian KirkpattieCake. I'm an author, robot, and loin streamer, and today I wanted to do like 5 hot takes. And if we have time at the end of this video, I will do the bonus hot take. But before we get started, just a couple of things. Number 1, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number 2, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. There are 2 ways to be featured on the channel. Number 1 is Lamwai, which is the monthly prompt writing thing that I do on the channel, where I give you guys a prompt, you write a short story, I read them here, and then we bask in the greatness of this community because you guys are rock stars. Number 2 is if you are an indie author and you would like to be exposed to
I'm an indie author, almost. I'm about to release
on this channel.
One day.
Here, now,
Someday
or
soon.
in the future. You just submit your first chapter and your cover,
My cover!
And then it'll be read on this channel and
one
hopefully
yet.
help readers find your
Got the
books
art,
and
but I don't have it
tickle
put
their
together
pickles
yet.
so they want you to
I
go
gotta
and
get on
ingest the rest. That was totally done on purpose. And number 3, if you would like to check out any of my books, whether to enjoy them or roast them, they're available at all of your favorite retailers, some of them as audiobooks, some as hardcover, all of them as paperback and ebook. And look at these beautiful character elements right down here. You've got the human skull, you've got the white cat, there's a raven skull right there, and a nuclear explosion. You've also got my boys over here. You can't see them very well, but there's some Yakuza back there. And also specifically, this book, my forthcoming novel, Bleed More Body More, the sequel to Bleed More Body More, or the follow-up novel, comes out at the end of this month. The cover is beautiful by the incredibly talented Samuel Johnson. Check it out. Get it yourself to look at its beauty in person. It's so good. It's so good. And I hope you enjoy it.
Really good color.
Actually, I would make a joke, but I genuinely hope that you enjoy it because the story means a lot to me and I love the characters in that book. So, with that said, those are all of the announcements. Oh yeah, and you can also get my books at your library. If you request them with the librarian, they can be ordered. So, I'd appreciate if you did that. A disclaimer before jumping into the topic of the day is that all of these are obviously just opinions and observations and my thoughts, and part of it is to start conversation about some things, to get some, and maybe encourage other people to share their hot takes or share their perspectives, and maybe you'll change my mind on how I feel about some of these things. Maybe you won't. But the great thing is that even if we disagree on some things, we can still like each other. Like, I am sure that you do not have the same level of interest or compassion for Jeffrey Dahmer as I do, and you can even think that I am a freak for it. That is absolutely fine, but we can still be friends despite our differences. Anyway, these are just some random thoughts.
Maybe
not super.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But if I'm thinking what I think she's saying, I would change it from my interest and fascination with Jeffrey Dahmer to my interest and fashion with the Jeffrey Dahmer case. because, like, sure, Jeffrey Dahmer is interesting as a case study of, like, how depraved humanity can get, but I think separating your interest in the person versus what the person did might be a little bit better.
Organized.
Was that hot take number one?
But I wanted to get them out there, get the discussion had with you guys, and see what your thoughts are either on this, or invite you to leave your own hot takes down below. This is actually a safe space, unironically, for you guys to share your opinions, because I don't care if we've got differences. I don't care if you care about things that I don't care about, or vice versa. Everybody is free to love and hate and judge the things that they feel like. And I just hope that we can have some interesting conversations and share some perspectives, and yeah. So my first writing book hot take is that fiction doesn't have to have a lesson. So one conversation that I keep seeing pop up all the time, especially, is about themes in books, or whether the book is teaching a lesson. And I think this comes up especially a lot in middle grade and YA. I've seen the conversation so many times in YA about how YA is meant to teach children or teach teens what appropriate behavior is or what is cool, and it's specifically being used to morality police or morality teach to children or teens. And that kind of keeps carrying over into adulthood as well, because I've seen enough conversations in general in the writing community about insert.
We have to kill this thing now. I'm gonna use this. Fuck, he's gone. Damn it. I have a bunch of spiders all over the tops of my walls to keep the gnats in check. And do they do it? No, of course not.
Lessons, and whether a book should have a lesson and what even is a lesson varies from perspective to perspective. I've seen people say that even something that's just like having a theme in your story of maybe working with your family through all of the difficulties is theoretically a lesson, but I don't know if I would consider a theme specifically a lesson. I think a theme can be a lesson, but a theme isn't always a lesson, if that makes any sense. I think a lesson typically requires the author to specifically write a story, like a morality play, with the intention of teaching the reader something.
Wheel of morality, turn, turn, turn. Tell us the lesson that we should learn. I remember that. Yeah, I think that you can always learn anything from any book. So even if it's not meant to have a theme or a lesson to it, you could still learn something. Like, you know, just the way that you read it, you gained this information and you kind of learned, you know what, hey, I really liked the way that, you know, this character handled himself in the situation, and I learned that I shouldn't care what others think about the way that I look. Something like that, right? Whatever the actual like lesson is that you learned, that could be something that you learn on your own from the book. But it might not be something that the author is really trying to impose. They just think, you know, my character, you know, this character doesn't think or doesn't care what people think about them, so I have to write it that way. And then when people read that, they go, I really resonate with that, and I believe that's how I should act too, so I'm going to start acting that way. When you have lessons in your book, when you actually write to try to really like give your opinion and give like what you think should be a lesson, I don't think it's wrong, but I do think that you start getting into like really tricky territory there, because you might just be injecting yourself too much. I think that themes are totally fine. Lessons are where you could easily trip up and kind of spoil the book, because you kind of have to like really hammer it home if you really want a lesson to be learned, you know? Like the resolution has to like really instill, you know, whatever the lesson is. And you know, with young adult, I don't think that that's probably the place to do it. You know, I would say elementary and like middle middle school is probably where you would want to have those kind of books that really actually hammer home a real lesson. Less so in middle school. But when you get into like young adult, which is like high school and college, I would say that at that point, they're probably not really going to listen to a lesson, but they are going to be influenced in thinking of like what, like how she said, like what's cool and like what the appropriate thing is, because that's where you're going to have those people who are reading the book. They see a character that they like, do a thing, and they're going to say, oh, well, I like this character, so therefore I should probably like the thing that they're doing, right? And that could be used for good or ill, because you could be like, really get them on board with a character, and then the character starts doing darker and darker things, and that person's like, yeah, you know what, I agree with that because I liked them before, and this dark place that they're going to, if the same circumstances happened to me, I'd do the exact same thing. I'd get dark. I'd start murking people, and you could really twist that shit around. So yeah, I just don't know about having like lessons in a book for young adults.
I think if the reader gets something out of the book, or if there is a deeper theme that's like love conquers all, or you can make it through anything with the right support system, or great success comes at a great loss. Like if you include anything that's a theme in your story, it's not necessarily a lesson, it's just a story built into the parable of the characters and whatever they're doing. But I think a lesson requires the author to be thinking about what it is that they want to educate the reader on. And I think that's something very different than just having a theme when you go into a story.
Yeah.
This is the person, the author, creating the story with the intentions of telling the reader something that they think the reader doesn't know, and then building stuff around the story in order to further educate the reader. And I don't think fiction needs that. I don't think, especially fiction for adults, should be trying to teach people anything. It can entertain and it can bring new perspective, but in order to go in and educate, I think is completely out of line from one adult to another.
So again, I mainly agree, but I do kind of think of like the exceptions to that. So like, for instance, I would look at like 1984 being something of an educational book, in a sense of like, hey, watch out, because like as we continuously like further technology, we're going to further the ability to spy on each other, and at some point it's going to become a totalitarian state where everyone is kind of complicit in it, and everyone's kind of spying on each other. And then if you are found out to be a spy, or you're found out to like not really agree with just what the common think is, then you need to go to re-education camps and things of that nature. And honestly, like we've literally heard things like that in the past 10 years. People have said that about both the left and the right. I would say the left says it a little bit more. And that's like the far sides are like, they need to learn what reality is, and and then the other side saying that they need to learn what reality is, that kind of shit. So there are people today who would say like re-education camps would be a good thing, right? And maybe that's because they never read 1984. Maybe they never even heard of it. Maybe they had no idea. Maybe they think that this is all like a brand new idea that came up back in 2013, 14 or whatever. And, it's a brand new thing, right? Like, I would say that books like that are trying to impart a lesson, which is a little bit more of like a warning, I guess. Like, hey guys, this is a serious problem. Watch out for it in the future, kind of thing. I think that might be a little bit, or like, hey guys, these are the missteps that we made in my generation, so please don't mess it up in your generation and do the same shit. Please watch out for that. I think that those kind of lessons are fine. Again, you got to watch out for how you're doing it, because otherwise, you might be clubbing the reader over the head to death with the book. But those are exceptions, right? I would agree that like fiction does not need to have these things, to have like lessons, but I don't think that, and I don't think that she really said this either, but I don't think that like having a lesson in a book for adults is inherently bad. It's probably one of those things where it's like it's very easy to do wrong, and so therefore it's usually bad because people don't do it very well. But when it's done well, it can be very powerful.
And I also think it's kind of dubious for authors to try to supersede parents via trying to use YA to teach people things. Like if we look at Jack of Hearts, where it's trying to teach students how to have sexually active relationships, how to give blowjobs, how to use people as dildos without emotional attachment, I think that's dangerous. And
yeah, so she did a video on this Jack of Hearts book, which you may have heard, you may not have, or you at least may have heard of the controversy where basically, you know, on a lot of the headlines, it was like, you know, oh, these schools are trying to get rid of this, you know, LGBT, you know, fiction book, right? They're trying to get rid of this, you know, just because it has LGBTQ themes in it. But the reality was that the parents who didn't want it in their schools were because, hey, look, this is like depicting graphic sex. Like, this is not like fade to black kind of stuff. This is like we're really, the kids are really reading like steamy, spicy romance scenes that are not fade to black, right? And it was marketed in a way that was kind of like, hey, this is good for kids to learn about LGBTQ and how it feels or whatever, because like the main character is like a 17-year-old kid in high school or whatever, and blah blah blah. So if you want to learn more about that, watch Ian's video on that. She did a really great video. It was a little too long to do a react to, so I didn't do a react to it, but it was a really good video. That is a really good example of basically a writer and maybe even the publisher. I'm not really sure. I mean, I imagine, I'm not sure who was really like trying to force it into the like middle school system, because that's where it was kind of going to. Like middle schools kind of differ a little bit around the country. Like for me, I had 6th grade was elementary school, and then 7th, 8th, and 9th was my junior high, my middle school. But I know a lot of places have 6, 7, and 8 going into middle school. So that meant that in some places, 11 and 12-year-olds were able to read this. Which, you know, let's just be honest. I mean, whether it was LGBTQ or whether it was straight heterosexual stuff, it's way too much for kids that young. Whoever was like really trying to force it into those school districts and those school systems at that age, I mean, really even for high schools, it's probably a little too raunchy. It sounded like that was a problem. Right, because the parents are trusting the schools to do right by them, right? We're saying, as parents, we're saying, hey, we need, you know, and we're paying tax dollars, right? We're paying for this. We need you to teach our kids how to be able to do the things that they're going to need to do to function in society correctly, right? And there's a whole other argument about whether or not that's really happening, right? But one of the places that people don't really think about, like, we look at math scores, we look at test scores a lot, but we don't really look at like what is the reading content that they're actually reading about, right? Because we're just kind of blindly trusting that whatever's made it into the school district system must have been reviewed by multiple people who all greenlit it, and therefore it passed thorough inspection kind of thing, right? So the fact that this book did get into some of these schools is alarming. But everything I just said, I agree with, and I do stand by it. But on the other side of that, this is one of those things where parents do still need, even though we're letting the school system raise our kids for a large portion. Let's be honest, they're just raising our kids for us. Even though we're letting them do that, we still need to be more present and have more oversight. So, we say, hey, let me see your homework, so that way I can make sure that you did it right, and also to make sure you did it right. But let me just see your homework. We should also be saying let me see what books you're reading, right? We should be looking at this stuff. So I do put most of the blame on the school systems for putting that book in, and there's probably others besides this Jack of Hearts. There's probably others that are wildly inappropriate for these kids to be reading. But I also put some of the onus on the parents who just are blindly following the government in a sense, right? Like we there's this detachment where it's school, and yeah, sure, I'm sure all the teachers have the best of intentions for our kids and stuff. They're doing what they think is right, So we're trusting our schools. They're local, right? But really, that is. But then you turn around though, and you're like, I don't trust the government to do anything right by us. But then for some reason we think that the schools are going to do right by us, and they're not going to. So I do put some onus on the parents for what their kids read. So if I wrote a book that is for middle grade, and let's just say I'm even doing my absolute best, right? I am trying to make this a middle grade book. I still expect that the parents review the book, that they look at it and they go over it. I don't know whether they want to read the whole thing or just skim through it, whatever it is that they feel is appropriate for how much they need to know about it in order to greenlight it for their kids. I think that they should be the ones to have the final say in whether or not their kid reads it. And I shouldn't be held accountable if it's a message that they don't want their kid reading, and then their kid reads it, and then it gets flipped back on me for writing the book. It's like, well, I wrote the book, and I did my best to write, a book for middle grade, let's say. And it really, there's really nothing in it, but maybe it has, religious themes, or maybe it has anti-religious themes, or whatever it might be that the parent doesn't agree with, and then they say, what, this book shouldn't be allowed because I disagree with it on a moral basis, something like that, right? Rather than just being like overly raunchy or something. So I do still put a lot of that on the parents.
And I don't think it is the job of a YA book to be teaching children about sexuality. I think that is an overstep of the trust that a parent has in books, and I think it's disrespectful to parents to try to sneak stuff like that into books, and I think it's immoral, really. I do
agree that it's sneaking into the book is wrong, but I think if the book is explicit, like on the back blurb, let's say, that like this is what's in this book, then there's nothing wrong with that. I do think that there is probably something wrong with writing a book that's all about sex and aiming it towards kids. That there is inherently wrong about that. But if you're talking about young adult, then you're talking about 17-year-olds is like the age of consent in a lot of places. 18-year-olds is the consent in a lot of places, right? So you're talking about like 17 to maybe like 20 is young adult, where like you would really think like the majority of that genre is really targeted toward, I would say. And I think that having a book that's targeted towards them, at that point, they're their own person, right? Again, in some places, 17 is not the age of consent, so you have to watch out for that. But in a lot of places, it is. And if they're in that place, then they're an adult at that point, and I don't really see anything wrong with it at that time.
I might even posit that it is immoral to specifically try to sneak things into YA or children's books in order to teach children when parents don't know. And there is a difference between parents purchasing a book with the
100%
purpose
agree.
of educating a
100%
child, such as like you're getting this book of ABC, you're getting this picture book of ABCs to teach your child some of these different things. That's completely different than sneaking morality into your book, specifically to educate the teen on what is good and what is bad, and you've created this whole universe in order to set up those people bad, these people good. Like, again, Jack of Hearts demonizing monogamous relationships the entire time. There's actual misogyny in that book where the characters all hate females, and they insult straight relationships every single time. They're denigrating. The main character is completely denigrating to all the female characters in the book, including his best friend. And I think it is dubious to try to sneak in lessons that then undermine parents and hide what it is you're telling the parents. In the same way that I would say hiding smut in YA books from parents in order to sneak sexual intercourse into children's books is also immoral. Like,
I would agree with the last point. Sneaking in the sex is wrong. I think that sneaking in, like, the lessons of morality, I don't think that that's wrong. And the reason why is that your book probably sucks if you're doing this, by the way. Because again, it's one of those things where when you're trying to force in a lesson, you are probably sacrificing storytelling because you're trying to really force a thing, right? Now, even though the things that she said, like, you know, misogyny and, you know, straight up hating on monogamous relationships, those are bad. I mean, I would agree that that is bad morality, right? I think that you shouldn't think that way, but I'm going to write characters who would agree with that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still going to have characters who would say, like, why are you in a monogamous relationship when you can have so many others, right? Or, you know, men are stupid, women are stupid. Like, you know, you're going to have those people because they're in the real world. You're going to have them in your stories because that's real, right? Again, that's kind of a step back, just having a character that says those things. But having, like, your main character really pushing that through to the reader that this is how you should think, right? I think that the writer should have the right to write that. And again, I think that parents need to not trust schools, and they should be looking at what their kids are reading. They should be looking at what their kids are reading regardless, whether it's from the school or from a public library, or whether they bought it at Barnes & Nobles, whatever, right? I think that parents should be watching what their kids are reading. Just like how you watch what your kids are watching on TV or going to movies, right? You don't have the nice, clean, you know, PG, PG-13. You don't have those nice, clean ratings to just, like, easily understand whether or not your kid's old enough to go watch that movie, kind of thing, right? But you should be able to read a back blurb. And this is kind of the part where she was saying, like, sneaking it in, that is bad. But having the back blurb should give some indication whether or not the parent should go, okay, you know what, that seems a little weird, or, like, this book seems like I should probably read it. Based off what I've read on the back blurb, this is totally safe, or I don't know if it's totally safe, so I'm going to go ahead and read the book first, read it, and then go, okay, you know what, yeah, you can read this, right? And maybe have a conversation like, yeah, read it, and we're going to talk about it after because there's some things in this book that I want to talk to you about, right? And I know that sounds like, you know, like the perfect world situation where it's like, well, you know what? I don't have time to do that. I'm making the meals. I'm going to work. I got 2 jobs, that kind of thing, right? But you do have to prioritize your life in a sense of what's most important, right? And sometimes you're going to have to take the time to read that book first. Plain and simple. You're going to have to read it. And maybe, you know, maybe another option too is, like, rather than read the book, go read reviews on it, right? Go watch videos like Ian's and go, you know, I'm gonna search this book. I'm gonna see what people are saying about it. So that way I don't have to actually take the time to read it. I can just watch like a 30-minute video during my lunch break at work, kind of thing, right? Whatever it is that you can do to gain more information on this book to determine whether or not your kid should actually be reading it. That's one of those things where I would say we as parents are in fault, where we have placed too much blind trust in the system and in our schools, and then we get mad, right? We get mad that the schools are doing this, and we should get mad, but at the same time, it's like, you know what? In all honesty, I shouldn't have really trusted you in the first place, and I should have been checking what you were teaching my kids, right? So I think that the writers should be able to write whatever they want to write, right? That's my main point, is just whatever they want to write, I think they should be able to write that. And then, you know, then it becomes kind of hard when you start talking about who you're marketing to, right? If your book is, you know, full of smut and it's about 17-year-olds, which I'm pretty sure the book was, I'm not sure if she ever said where the book was supposed to be taking place, because if it's in America, a lot of places are 18 plus for age of consent, and yeah, kids are still gonna screw around, kind of thing, right? But it's one of those things where it's like, technically, isn't this child pornography in a way? Like, am I wrong about that? Like, isn't this basically like child smut literature? It's just really, it's uncomfortable place to have to really think about whether or not that should be viewed as like illegal, rather than just like, you know, oh, this is inappropriate or wildly inappropriate. It being illegal is a whole other conversation that maybe should be happening. So yeah, I think that person who wrote the book had every right to write it, but I do question on who it was marketed to.
You put a YA face on it in order to sneak it into kids' hands. We might need to call Chris Hansen. So again, hot take number one, I don't think fiction needs to have lessons. It's meant to be entertaining, and if there is a deeper meaning to it, if you can philosophize to it, if there's thoughts about trauma or growth or experience or anything else like that, that's gravy on top. But I think themes are different than an author going into a story with the purpose of trying to educate the reader on something. And that's with me knowing that Bodymore, Dead End Drive, and Boom all have themes that you can catch onto and analyze for deeper meanings in the story. But I'm not trying to teach you anything. They're just there. Number two.
Okay, so overall, I agree. I don't think that fiction needs to have lessons. I think that themes are good enough, because that way you're really just presenting an idea and saying like, well, what do you think about this, right? And that reader can infer what they want to infer, and they can learn the lesson that, you know, you put it out there and they said, yeah, you know what, I do agree with that, or they can say, no, I don't agree with that, right? So I think that I think the key word on there is need. I don't think that fiction books need to have lessons. I don't think it's wrong for them to have lessons, but I do think that forcing a lesson into a book makes it to where it's you can very easily mess up the story, mess up the writing, really, just because you're forcing something too much.
Is memoir POVs don't need to be likable. So I've recently started reading this book called Tokyo Vice by Jake Adelstein, and I was on the Goodreads page the other day, yesterday, maybe it was this morning, and was looking over some of the reviews to see what people were thinking about it who have read it. I'm only about 30 pages into it.
Well, and I'll just say I don't know if I'm assuming it's probably the same thing, but it might not be the same thing. But that an HBO show called the same thing, Tokyo Vice, great show. So if it's from that same book, then.
And a lot of people in the reviews were saying how much of a douche they thought the author was. Now, you can get douchey vibes immediately because the author gave his own book a 5-star review on Goodreads. That's kind of just in general how it comes off when you rate your own book. But They are talking about the way that he cheats on his wife, or
I've never
the way
read
that
anything
he talks
better.
about, pretty much the way that he cheats on his wife and the way that he talks about women, and just going at him for being kind of a douchebag. And I've noticed this also when in some of the articles that I haven't gotten to share yet on this channel. One of them was about the book that tore the literary community apart, and I may or may not ever get around to actually talking about that. I have the articles saved. I haven't gotten to talk about them yet, but that is one of them that...
Do it, Ian. Talk about it.
Got ripped apart because they didn't like some of the ways that the author referred to some of her students or the thoughts that she had, because they thought that they were insulting, and she was just laying bare her thought processes, who she was at the time, the way that she thought, and how she grew as a person. And I'm here to say that humans in general can be kind of abrasive. We are also very used to our own way of thinking, and we may not necessarily think that the way that we think or the way that we thought in the past was insulting at the time of us thinking those things.
Yeah, a lot of times we're going to turn a blind eye because, you know, being that you're you have to like really be fully behind yourself in this world, because basically no one else will be, right? Like even your own mom is going to disagree with you and say no at some point in time, kind of thing, right? So like the only person that's always going to have your back is you, right? So like the guy giving himself a 5-star review is kind of like the epitome of that, where you're like, everything I do is great, right? And that's why it hurts being told like your artwork, because your artwork is so much a reflection of who you are, kind of thing. Like I painted this tree, it sucks. Fuck. Oh God, it does suck. I thought it was so good. But when you really think about how you think of things, you would probably not like yourself as much. If you really took a step back and thought about how you, like as a third party, you really judged the way that you think of things, you probably would not agree with yourself. You probably would say like, man, why did I use that? Like, why did I think that? Like, that seems a little fucked up. But you don't think that. You glaze over that, right? You hear someone else say the exact same thing, and you would be like, oh gosh, dude, why do you have to say it like that? That seems really ridiculous. Oh my gosh, right? That can happen, right? A lot of us think normal thoughts on a day-to-day basis, right? A lot of us think, and you can see this like in the internet, like for those of us who are like millennials, we've really seen this trend explode, where before the internet really took off, it was just like there was such a divide. Like you were worried that people were going to think that you're weird, right? You were worried that people would judge you for what you thought, and they will. That didn't change. They will think that you're weird. They will think that they will judge you for your thoughts. But you start realizing like, holy shit, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that thinks like this. I'm not the only person that had that opinion. I'm not the only person that likes doing this thing, right? That has exploded so much because of the internet, where people, especially when people were anonymous, like now it's become people don't even care to be anonymous anymore. But you know, before when it first started taking off, people were anonymous about what they were saying, what they were thinking and stuff. But you had that validation in what they were putting out, right? You were like, oh my gosh, I agree with this so much. This is so great. And that, I think, is probably like the crux of this problem, is that people are judging what this other person thought very harshly, when put in the same shoes, they would probably think either the same or very similar things, you know? Thoughts stay in your head and different words come out of your mouth because you know that, like, okay, look, I'm about to try to teach this fucking idiot how to do math, but I can't obviously call him a fucking idiot because that would hurt his feelings. So, hey, little Timmy, that's not how you add 4 and 1 together. Let's try it this way, right? you're going to be really nice about it, right? But you think in your head like, wow, this is so easy. This is so easy that I can't believe that he can't do it, kind of thing, right? That's where a lot of times people's minds are going to be at when you're trying to engage with someone who's dumb, right? You're going to think to yourself, man, this guy's really fucking stupid. This guy's dumb as fuck right now. But you're not going to say that out loud. And a lot of times people only judge themselves off of what they say out loud rather than what they actually think in their heads. And like she's talking about here in a memoir, these people are giving an account of what they're actually thinking in their brains, which is going to be a lot rougher than what they say out loud.
Because we might not have really considered the subjects of what we were saying, or we might just be insensitive. As I have been called insensitive like 1.5 million times, I accept that I may not be the greatest at this, but humans are humans. Humans are imperfect. Humans are going to say things that offend some other people, that we're going to live lives that are not moral necessarily, or that would fit your morality, and we're going to believe things that you may not believe or that you may think are stupid. And when you're reading a memoir, you're reading somebody's life and experiences. We're assuming that the memoirs are true and that they're not somebody bullshitting for authority and funny money and fame. Sometimes they are. But we're going to pretend in a best case scenario that these memoirs are honest. You're just getting somebody's brutal truth about who they are and what they are, and that person doesn't have to be likable. A lot of people that are into shady things or doing shady things live a lot of lives that we don't live, and you don't have to consider that person.
I also don't know why people would think, like, people who read, I don't really read memoirs, right? I've read one in the past. I don't really care to do it. Actually, no, I've read more than one in the past, but I don't care to read memoirs because basically, I mean, sure, the events of that person's life might be interesting, but really for the most part, it's like, it's just not fantastical enough. I want to read sci-fi, fantasy. I want to read like wild ass shit. Okay. And memoirs just don't really cut it for me, but I think that people who read memoirs should really have the expectation that, like, I might not like this dude, you know? I might not like this lady. I don't know why you would think that that person needs to be likable to you. Like, it just seems weird. Like, that seems like a real, like, disconnect in the subject matter, I guess. Like, if I went and read a fantasy novel and I'm like, God, there's not enough romance in this. Like, what the fuck, dude? Like, why isn't there any romance? Come on. That would be me. That'd be my fault for setting myself up for something that could happen. You know, you might like the person in a memoir, but you might not. And there might be a romance in a fantasy, but there might not be. So going into a book expecting something that's not a guarantee, like I'm guaranteed to have a fantasy with fantastical elements to it, I'm not guaranteed to have a romance. Going in expecting that romance is me setting myself up for a bad time. So people who read memoirs, I don't understand why you would assume that you're going to like this person just because they wrote a book, just because they're writing a memoir. I don't understand why you would think that this person's going to be good. Or at least your version of good.
Person moral or even likable to think that what they're doing is interesting or to invest in what it is that they've captured. Always approach any nonfiction or memoir with the level of, not scrutiny, but the level of caution that this person's personality is going to come out in it. Like when I was reading Those Who Fight Monsters by the FBI guy, Ressler, you could tell that he had some arrogance to him from the way that he described things, but you would based on the position. You're going to be arrogant when you're kind of the top of the FBI or a top member of the FBI, and you're creating this whole department for behavioral study units for tracking down serial killers. When you're so high in demand, you're going to have a bit of an ego, which is fine because you're human. but also just go into the book understanding that this character is a person who has their own personality, and it's going to come out what their flaws are, that they might not even recognize what their own flaws are because they're so used to seeing them. Or somebody is not necessarily
your flaws are like
I'm
your
not
nose.
that far into the Jake book. I don't know what the situation is with his wife and his cheating. I obviously actually despise cheaters because of my background with my father, but I'm not going to use that to ding against the author and go after the author, because I'm there for the stories that the author is telling, and I don't have to like him as a person to find his perspective or his experiences interesting, if that makes sense. But for some reason, it seems like there's this assumption that in order to enjoy a book or be invested in a book, or at least say that you're liking a book of some kind, you have to agree with who the main character is. And this has to do with like morality policing that I've seen also in fiction, where people seem to have a difficult time reading or enjoying a book where maybe the main character is immoral or is flawed or is going through terrible things, and they have bad opinions, and maybe they grow from those opinions or maybe they don't. And it's okay to have flawed and immoral characters as long as it makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that I've kind of seen this a little bit too. There was a book, Crescent City. So I watched a few reviews on Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. I think I'm saying all this correct. Don't murder me. And in those reviews, because the first chapter is like she's partying, right? So she's at a club, she's partying, she's doing coke or something, or some sort of like, fantasy coke or something. I don't know what she was doing. But the people who were reviewing the book, talking about it, were like, she's out there, she's having fun, she's like doing drugs, and like, oh, okay, you do you, right? It's one of those things where I got the impression that the people who were reviewing the book probably would disagree with like their family or friends doing coke kind of thing. Like, hey, like they'd probably have the reaction of like, dude, that's like dangerous shit. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. But when it's a character in a novel, it's like, hey, you know what, you do you. It's totally fine, kind of thing, right? They just kind of seemed a little apprehensive, but then just so they wouldn't step on any toes, or maybe so that way they could just like, because they enjoyed the character later on, they kind of doubled back on maybe their apprehension and were just kind of like, but yeah, you know what, she's a good person, so she can do coke if she wants to, or magic coke or whatever it was. And I've seen that kind of play out in other reviews as well, where the characters do something that is typically morally apprehensive, not super abrasive, like murder, like where it's cold-blooded murder, and obviously it's kind of like, I probably shouldn't like this character kind of thing, because I'm technically now following the bad guy in a way. But usually things that are more like drug related, maybe promiscuity even. Some people aren't okay with that in real life, but they're okay with it when it's a fantasy character kind of thing. I do see that people kind of give that a little bit more of a pass. But I would also agree with the idea that, like, if that character doesn't have like the right set of morals, they could actually do all the bad things, right? Like, I mean, you watch some of these TV shows like Vampire Diaries, for instance, right? I've had to watch that a couple times, thanks to my wife. And they have, or they say they have, certain morals, a certain moral value, right? But then they go off and they do all these things that don't really align with those morals, right? And you could say it's kind of like, oh, I'm stepping outside my moral guideline to basically save somebody, and then we can go back to normal kind of thing. But so often it's really just to push the character in that direction, and they just kind of keep going in that direction. They don't really ever follow their morals as much as they really say they do. The people who follow their morals the most in those kind of stories are the people who have like no morals, to begin with. And they're like, I don't really give a shit about anything. I'm going to kill everybody I want to kill. I'm going to do all the drugs I want to do. And then they go do those things, right? Then they go do it. While all the other characters who are like, no, I'm a moral person, I'm good, they still go out and they do those bad things, and the readers agree with that. Like, that's good enough. As long as you say you have the morals, as long as they have like an internal struggle for a minute before they do their first line of coke, right? That's fine. Then it becomes like, you do you kind of thing. But they don't have that moral struggle for the first line. Then they might be a little off about that. So I find it a little bit of both ways, where sometimes they get a pass because they like the person's morals, and then other times they might not get a pass because the morals aren't there, or the morals aren't either just plain out and out said, like we're just told that they have these morals even though they don't show it ever, or they do show some moral fortitude earlier on and then they lose it over time. I think that's how some of the characters get a pass, and some characters don't get a pass. So it's a little bit of both ways.
As long as you're be there for the story, not for the flawless moral queen that is Isla Crown. Which, that's going to be a discussion in a later video. I would like to compare Isla Crown and stuff like Layla from
Saviors?
The Saviors Champion. That was the one. And a lot of these female heroines that see absolutely no problem whatsoever with murdering everyone around them, and they're still considered the good guy, even though they're like power hungry and justifying mass murder. We're going to get to that in a later video.
That kind of makes me think, I haven't read that book, so I don't know, but it kind of makes me think of the Punisher, right? The Punisher is this guy, if you don't know, which you probably do, but if you don't know, the Punisher is this guy in Marvel Comics who kills criminals. He is hardcore about killing them. He's not about, he's totally fine torturing them too to get more information out of them, kind of thing. He is not the guy to send them to jail. He doesn't want them to live, right? And so a lot of other heroes, like Daredevil, Spider-Man, a lot of other heroes have a problem with them because they're like, well, look, dude, like, we're all trying to fight these bad guys and put them in jail, and yet you're over here just murking them left and right. And technically, we get where you're coming from, buddy, but you're kind of killing people. So it's one of those things where I do kind of wonder if these writers that she's talking about, who are writing these female characters that are just okay with killing everyone, if they have that mindset of like, okay, look, he kills, or she, in this case, she kills the bad guys. So these guys deserve it. And then, that way it's morally justified. But I don't know how morally justified it is because I haven't read those books. But that's a really like thin line to ride on. And I think Punisher does it well in the story of like the family or the mob lords who killed his family and him basically seeking revenge and like wiping them completely out. But then when he continues on past that crime family and he's killing others that did nothing to him, it starts to become a more murky territory because now he's just a murderer. And yeah, he is murking bad guys, but some of these criminals have probably only done like armed robbery. Maybe they've only done bank heists, like they were just the driver kind of thing, right? And he's just mowing them down anyways, right? So you do kind of get into murky territory even with a character that's that established. Hey,
for now, just know you don't have to like the main character or the POV or every thought and feeling and response that a memoir has to the others around them. Just know that those are people, and I think it actually shows more emotional maturity and flexibility to be able to try to understand why somebody thinks the way that they do when you disagree with how they are, and to put it into perspective of this is who they were at this time and this is why they think that way, and that's totally fine. Understanding why somebody thinks the way that they do, whether it's because of their background, because they've had experience in the past that has tainted them to certain things, whether they just have biases for whatever other reason, understanding why they have those things and giving grace to it is actually an expression of compassion and understanding that may or may not be turning into a lost art. Yeah. Number 3 is you don't need...
All right, so before we get into this, I 100% agree with the idea that, like, you shouldn't have to like the person who does a memoir, because usually people who are going to write a memoir are probably not just like paragons of virtue. They probably have some sort of like really fucked up story to tell, so it's not going to be a totally virtuous story. But I do see this problem, and she touched on it already, where this goes over into fiction, where the problem is actually not with the readers, with the writers. And the problem is that a lot of these characters are starting off as paragons of virtue, and they basically have no room to grow, because they already are virtuous at every single turn. They're already good, right? That's one of the things that we, as writers, really mess up a lot, is that we think, okay, this is our good guy. We want them to be liked, right? So what do? Okay, we were going to make it to where they were like, they had to suffer as a child. So like maybe like their parents died, or one parent died, and the other person was angry at them, kind of thing. So they had a really rough upbringing. They didn't get fed a whole lot because they were either poor or destitute, or their parents hated them and beat them, and so all these things to make you like this character out of like sympathy. Then we're also going to make them, even though they had this terrible, terrible childhood that would make any normal person be like vindictive and probably greedy, and like they would hoard things because they have basically nothing, so now they're going to hoard things. Instead, this character just loves everybody, trusts everybody, and that's one of their flaws. They're too nice, they're too trusting, so they get taken advantage of because they're just so trusting. Why would they trust anyone? I don't know, but they do. And they give everything they have away. Why? I don't know, but they do. And they are always just making the right moral decisions, right? That character has no room to grow, and that character is ultimately boring, and you're forcing all your conflict outside of them. So now they can never really have internal conflicts other than like relational conflicts. So basically it's like, they're falling in love with someone, and maybe they find out that person's like not good for them, kind of thing, and now they have to struggle with whether or not they should love this person. Okay. And that is kind of an internal conflict, but it's also really an external conflict, because it's the relationships, not them, that they have to deal with. It's the relationship that they're having to deal with, right? And even that is usually kind of rare. They probably find their perfect match who's a little bit more hard-boiled than them, but they, of course, are also paragons of virtue. And so they just sync perfectly together, and everything's great. And the only difficulty in them becoming together is probably that, he or she is poor, while the other he or she is rich. And so now we have this like, oh, I'm not good enough for you because I'm not rich enough, and well, I don't like my family because like they're fucking all assholes, and I want to be with you. And will they? Won't they? And then of course they will. It's a fucking romance. So those stories where the conflict is really always outside of the character, those are never going to be deep. They could be good. I'm not saying that they're not going to be good, but they will never really be deep when the character has to deal with like moral conundrums of their own. Try to use that mentality for the foot fetish guy from Hot D. Yeah, if we read like a memoir of that guy in House of the Dragon, I don't even know what his name is, but the guy with the club foot, if we had to read a memoir of him, it would be a dirty ass sleazy memoir with probably him looking at a lot of feet, and his climb to the top to look at the top feet, the queen's feet, God, that was really fucking disturbing. But yeah, that's my thought on that. Is you don't have to like someone in a memoir, and we're trying to. I think a lot of authors are messing up trying to make our characters too likable because we want them to be liked by the audience. We're trying to make them likable at every single turn, and they make bad decisions as far as like, do I go left or right? And they go right, and that was like the wrong way to go, kind of thing. But they never make immoral decisions. They never make difficult decisions between, like, you know, do I let my friend die or do I save my friend but then, you know, lose all the money, kind of thing, right? We never let the friend die. They're always going to save their friend and lose the money rather than take the money and leave the friend. We don't let them make those kind of like those hard decisions.
A degree or an agent to be a good writer. So I have seen have I seen some massive elitism in the writing community, both from published and unpublished authors, with people saying, hey, even if you're a good writer, you have to have an agent to double check that shit, or else you're probably a terrible writer. Like, somebody else will okay it if they think that you're a good writer. Someone else will say that you're worth it. Or you can't be a good writer without a degree. A lot of people then go into programs for creative writing thinking...
Whoever thinks that you need to have a degree to write, they don't understand writing at all. Because most writers will tell you, do not go to school for writing. Now, the one exception to this, the one exception to this is obviously Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson actually teaches creative writing, and he's an excellent author. But he kind of like laughs at that in the sense of, like, you know, they're kind of right, because a lot of times when you read other people who are masters of their craft or whatnot, they had a background in something else, right? One of the things I love most about my Steven Erikson Malazan series is that he was basically an archaeologist or paleontologist, something like that, and he was able to bring over his knowledge of like how ruins would look, like what you would find at a ruin, like what things actually could like mean, and like the information that you could glean from like an ancient site, you know. And it made his civilizations, it made his past civilizations that are dead and gone in his books, it made them seem so much more realistic, right? Like he was so good at having that world building of like knowing about different types of civilizations, because for decades he was studying them, right? And the same thing goes for a lot of other authors. They know about, I mean, like John Grisham is a great example too. I mean, he was a lawyer and he started writing a book about a lawyer, you know, and he's had great success with that shit. So you don't need to have a degree in writing. You probably want to read books on writing. Sure, you could take classes on writing, but do you need a degree? No, not at all.
That they're going to learn how to write, but let me tell you, the thing that you really get from going to a creative writing degree is the ability to network with other people, because a lot of success, I hate to say this, but a lot of success actually has more to do with luck than it has to do with skill. Knowing certain people, getting the doors open, having somebody say your name at a cocktail party or at a writer's retreat or something like that is much more likely to get you a deal than good writing. And cold calling, basically, with query letters. A degree won't make you a good writer, because a writing degree specifically is only as good as the work that you put into it. And a writing degree really only forces you to actually do the work that you would otherwise have to hold yourself to in order to get that stuff done. It can help you learn how to put a reading list together if you've never put a reading list together and you've sort of fallen out of reading or never been into reading, but it can help you learn the value behind reading if you're not much of a reader, and how to integrate the things that you like and the things that you don't like into your fiction so that you do become a better writer. And it's an expedited situation in order to become a better writer because you're focused on it. But you don't need a degree to be a good writer. Having a degree doesn't make you a good writer. I say this as a creative writing master's degree holder. It doesn't make you a good writer. And if you enjoy specifically writing genre fiction or to market fiction, I think a degree will generally not help you, because your degree seeking in general is going to be more focused on character-driven stories and writing things with subtext, and it's not going to be about marketing or querying or how to find.
Yeah. In every single class I've ever taken for creative writing, it's all about creative writing, and then like the last day, which is like an hour or an hour and a half, depending on the class, the last day is kind of about marketing, which is not really about marketing. It was in both classes that even did that, and not all of them even did it. In both classes that took the last day to talk about that, they were really more talking about basically just like querying is going to suck. You need to make sure that your query letter is as good as your book. You can't just like half-ass your query letter, and you need to be able to like drill down your genre. You need to be able to make it to where you can really easily explain what the book is, so that way the person who's going to be reading the book to see if they even want to take it will at least get past that part and go, okay, this sounds kind of interesting, I'll give it a shot. They start reading a few lines, they like that, and they keep going, kind of thing. So it was less about marketing and more about just like kind of just reinforcing like don't skimp on your querying, don't skimp on your synopsis. Make sure all of that stuff is really well written, so that way when they do read those things, they're going to know, okay, this person actually knows how to write, and so therefore I'm gonna take some more time into reading more of their stuff, and I'm gonna keep reading, and then they'll actually ask for the whole thing. That's basically what you're doing.
Success with genre marketing and genre fiction, and a lot of the academia, at least when I was there, looked down on genre fiction. Even sci-fi, which can cover very complicated and complex situations, generally it was still more character-driven focus and literary fiction focus. And I have seen so much arguing and fighting in the writing community about genre fiction is better, character fiction is better, literary fiction sucks, blah, 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 blah. Look, it's just different fiction for different people interested in different things. That's all that it is.
Yeah.
Enjoy your market fiction, enjoy your literary fiction. I'm going to be over here enjoying whatever it is I enjoy. Model Land, fairly enjoyable. Also, I like a lot of nonfiction. I actually have a lot of success with nonfiction. But yeah, don't let anybody fool you into thinking that you need to have an agent or somebody else approve of what you're writing in order for you to feel like you are a good writer. Now, there are ways to tell if you are a good or a bad writer, because agents garbage all the time. How many of you are actually going to tell me that 50 Shades of Grey is an excellently written book because an agent said it was great, or because an agent took it and they published it?
There's a lot of trash
so an agent does not ensure that something is great quality, just as a degree doesn't. Because how many of you would say that literary fiction sucks? Yeah, I bet you a bunch of those people that write literary fiction have a degree. So just different types of writing. An agent is also just another person, and I am not really for this writing by committee, where you can actually get helpful feedback from committee members, from crit partners, but an agent saying that your book is good doesn't automatically mean it's good, and having a degree doesn't automatically mean that you are above the competition and going to be getting a deal because you write better. If you write better. Let me tell you, some people, like I said, you get what you put into the degree-seeking program, and it's literally still all you and your creative ideas and your ability to get work done. So, there's that. Hot take number 4, indies/self-published books are judged harder in everything than traditionally published books. So on this channel, if you go through my book reviews, you'll see books from small presses, books that are self-published, indie-published, and trad-published books, including some Karen McManus books, which are very, very popular, including House Full of Ghosts, which is traditionally published, including Alexa Dunn's books, which are traditionally published. So you'll see me review and walk through, and Lightlark is coming eventually. You'll see me go through a bunch of different books from all over the spectrum of publishing. And I, in my reviews, walk through the plots and then walk through my critiques for the plots if they were not great, or for the stories, or for the characters. and go through all of the things that I thought weakened the story or just didn't work. I don't think I did A Stranger in the House on this channel, because what a disappointment that was. Bro, I thought it was a ghost story. I didn't even know anything about that book before I picked it up. I just thought, ghost story. It was a domestic thriller. It was a mistake to read, honestly, but it's very popular, and she's traditionally published, but it had so many issues with the plot, and I do not care enough to go back and reread it so that I can do a plot summary. Like, I'm sorry, that ship has sailed. But indies are judged for having subpar covers or basic covers, and I get it. I don't like the 3D model covers. Those kind of look like porn games to me, generally.
Yeah, they've taken over the market, though, because it is very easy for the artists to basically do those, to have the model positioned in a way that they want. And it just makes it easier for the artist, because they already have like half of the work done for them by just putting this 3D model on and then just photoshopping a couple things on top, and then boom, you're done, right? And I don't like it either, because I do think that it does kind of look like obviously it looks like a video game because it is a video game. It's made in like Unreal or something like that. I'm not sure what engine it's out of, but it's out of like a real video game engine. But it's one of those things where it's just kind of where the market went, because it's easier for the artist to do it. Because it's easier for the artist to do it, it's cheaper. Indie authors have to be kind of cheap because we don't have any money. So yeah, you know, I mean, it makes sense that the market went there. If you can have like your book with like really nice art, then yeah, you would rather have that, right? But that's not always easy to get. So you know, you gotta take what you can get. And I don't knock anyone for having those book covers. Those book covers do scream, this is an indie author. Although I do think that there are some who are traditionally published who have those things anyways, because basically just because like the market kind of went that way, and it kind of tells the audience like, hey, this is a romance book or whatever, right? This is dark romance, or this is paranormal romance. Like, you know, it makes it easier for the audience to kind of understand what the book is. But you know, I can't knock them for doing it, since it kind of helps enable, right? It kind of helps enable having a better book cover than what they would if I drew my book cover by hand, my God, it would suck, right? So I need to have these kind of tools that make it easier for me to get good looking art. That's why I did like the AI art for my book covers, because I wanted a more artsy look to it, but I didn't want that 3D character, right? So I went with AI generated art, which cost me a little bit of money to have the access to the program. And so I like the way that turned out.
But if you go and look at traditionally published book, like I'm looking at the shards right now, and there's really nothing fantastical about this. I look at the books on my shelf all the time for my traditionally published books, and generally I don't care what the cover is when I'm at the store and picking up books from authors that I am looking for. But you will see indie books, dragged for covers, and I think as long
All right, let's go here.
As long as the cover doesn't look like it's hand-drawn or it's kind of just garbagely put together, then we're good, because so many traditionally published books just have like a basic maybe scenery on the cover, or maybe it's just a plain color and then the title, and you can get super...
Yeah, like the serial killers. Oh, wow, it's got blood on it. Oh my goodness. This one's called White, but it's all red. What does that mean? Right? Yeah, some of these things are... they're not really gripping. They're not super eye-catching.
Extravagant with the drawings, but there are also very basic photographic images on the cover that really don't mean anything.
Yeah.
But indie books will be dragged for this. You also have indie books that are constantly dragged for not making sense, whereas traditionally published books make huge bucks because they get all of the marketing that gets them out there to all of these people, and it's great. Look at the Karen McManus books. I recommend you go check those out here on this channel to get an idea of what I mean, because those are very popular. She couldn't even get 4chan and Reddit. Like, oh my gosh, she mentions 4chan and Reddit in her stories, and she doesn't even know how those websites work. But those books are super popular, and she's got another one and another one and another one constantly coming out. So, like, what do you want? But I don't see a difference in the quality of plotting between indie books and trad books. You're just as likely to get a great book in trad as you are.
It is just kind of content at that point. Like I already forgot what the woman's name was that she just talked about, but like at that point, like once you have a market who is reading your books, you're gonna just have like repeats come back, and you're gonna lose some people, you're gonna gain some people, you're gonna lose people, gain some people, but you're gonna have a core audience that just keeps coming back over and over again, and like it's just content, right? I mean, like we all have our favorite YouTubers, we all have our favorite Twitch streamers, we all have all these different people that we watch, favorite TV shows, things that we watch all the time. Same thing with what we read, right? Like I would basically read any book that Steven Erikson puts out, because I loved the first book I read of his, and I loved the second book I read of his. So it's kind of like, you know what? I'm probably gonna like all of them. And then as I read them all, I was like, yeah, I was right. I knew I was gonna like this. I didn't worry about putting. It feels good to be able to spend your money knowing beforehand that you're gonna like that product, you know? So when someone is writing a book series and you like that author and you like the characters, you like the story, whatever, you like it, another one comes out and you're like, I don't know what I should buy, and then another one comes out and you go, oh, well, I know I'm going to like that, so you're going to buy it. So at some point, it's kind of like whether they make mistakes or not, it's not kind of really going to matter, because, you like everything else around it. And more than likely, it's very possible that the audience that she's talking to doesn't understand how 4chan or Reddit work either, so she can get away with those kind of mistakes. That's the thing, is like if you're writing to an audience and they don't you probably have a good guess that they're not going to understand how something works. You don't have to really understand how it works either.
With indie, it just so happens that there are just more books in indie because there's no gatekeeping, so the ratio is probably the same. You're just dealing with many more books. You also end up with editing errors that also happen in traditionally published books.
Yeah.
But people will drag indie books.
They'll be like, it was a 5-star book, but it had a few spelling errors, so I have to give it a 4. But it's like, dude, there's so many books I have that are professionally edited that have an error in them somewhere. Like the double A may easily slip past people, where it's like the same word at the end of one line starts the next line, and you just read over that as you continue to read, right? That messes people up so much. But yeah, absolutely true that the traditionally published do not get hit as hard. And I think that's probably because with traditional publishing, you assume that that it had an editor, right? Like there's no option that it didn't have an editor. Now, did that editor suck? Maybe. But there's no chance that it didn't have an editor. But with that indie author, they might have tried to skim corners here. They might have just edited it themselves and they messed up. They didn't see this error, and so therefore they didn't have an editor, because the editor would have definitely caught that. And so therefore they didn't have an editor, and I can't give them 5 stars now, because even though the book was fantastic and marvelous, and I would definitely read the next one, it's not right to give a book 5 stars unless it has all the spelling errors out of it. So I can't do it.
Or minor typos or errors, and talk constantly about, did this person even get an editor? When you'll see similar things in a lot of traditionally published books. I know it was a small press, but the Jeffrey Dahmer book that I have, the Dahmer Detective, it was done by a small press, and there is a chapter that straight up ends in the middle of a thought. Like, I don't even think the paragraph ends with a period. It's like the middle of a sentence, and then the next chapter just starts. And that was a publisher.
Whoops.
I think that the American Psycho book kind of confused me at some point, because I think that one also drops off like in the middle of something, and then it just goes to the next chapter. And I think that's actually there on purpose, because Patrick Bateman is having sort of a moment, and he just kind of loses it, and so then mid-sentence, he just disassociates, and then we're in the next chapter. But if that was in an indie book, that would have been dragged as being incomplete with editors. I think the same thing would happen with Butcher Boy over there, because Butcher Boy has imperfect English. Like, it doesn't use punctuation the normal way. Everything's in a paragraph. It doesn't really, I don't think it uses quotation marks very often, even though people are talking, because it's done in an Irish way, but he's just starts storytelling about what's going on in the way that he does. But it doesn't follow proper punctuation rules, because it's doing a more artistic thing. And he gets away with it because it's traditionally published and was also trad published in 1992, prior to 1992. But if that was done in indie published, it would have been dragged for the grammar choices instead of it being
because
an
he didn't have an editor.
choice. So
they didn't know what they were doing.
Maybe what am I trying to say here? It's like, maybe pull back on the opinion, like the harshness of it, of assuming that everything indie is trash and everything that's trad is like quality, because that's not actually the case. And you might be surprised if you open your mind and give things another chance that otherwise you might have just...
I would say also too that I really don't like the fact that indie publishing is so held to a higher standard of editing than traditional publishing. Like, if you find an error in traditional publishing, oh my gosh, hey, I found an error, they messed up, they didn't find this, but that wouldn't go in the review, right? But if you find something in indie, you're gonna be like, mother, he messed up, I found the error right here. Right, they're gonna be mad about it. It's like 2 different responses to the same issue, but because it's indie, it's like the person didn't try hard enough, right? While in traditional, it's just like, oh, they goofed, whoopsie. Who really cares? A little mistake made it through. It happens, whatever. But in indie, it's like, no, it's not okay, bro. It's not okay. But I do think that it is born of a place that is true, where a lot of indie authors, probably especially in the early days, who didn't have the ability to have editors, maybe even editors weren't really available back in those early days kind of thing, maybe. I don't really know for sure on that. But I have this feeling that it's probably the case that a lot of indie books don't have editors. Right. I've read a number of books as an ARC reader where I'm like, this is not ready for publication because you just have too many errors, right? And it's like the person's releasing in 3-4 days, and it's like, I wish I could have come to you sooner, before you were promoting that you're releasing this book in 4 days. But this book has too many errors. Like, it just does. It just has too many errors. Like, you've got punctuation issues, you got some spelling issues, you have some like the wrong version of the word. You have words that are like spelt similarly, but they're not the same. or like they're spelled like the word is really close to the word you mean, but it's not the right word kind of thing, right? Like your autocorrect probably gave you the other word on, you know, by mistake kind of thing. I've read those books where I'm like, this is not ready for publication. There's just too many errors. But they're going to publish it anyways, right? So I do know that there's a lot of books that probably don't go through an editor, right? They probably don't go through an editor. They probably don't go. The person probably doesn't even proofread as much as they should. I mean, like I understand that some people don't have the money for an editor, right? I, for instance, do not have enough money for an editor. But if you don't have enough money for an editor, that means that you have to take it upon yourself to be your own editor. To do that though, you have to invest a lot more time, because that means that I need to step away from the project for a number of months, probably like 2 or 3 months at least, to really get away from what I wrote, to forget about it, right? That way when I come back and I'm rereading it, it's closer to being new to me than it was if I had just finished and then started reading it at that point. I've mentioned before, I read backwards, right? I read the last sentence, then the next to last sentence, and then I read the next to last. I'm reading them in the correct order, right? But I'm reading them backwards just so that way I can find any spelling mistakes, any punctuation mistakes, and I'm not getting lost in the sauce, basically, of like what's going on in the story. I'm not getting lost in the flow of the paragraph, right? I'm reading it backwards so that way I can really find any kind of mistakes that I can. And the honest to God truth, I'm probably going to let things slip through that I don't notice because I'm still a fuck up, right? But that's like the give and take that you have to make, is like if you're not going to invest in an editor, and you're not going to really do the hard work yourself, then prepare to get roasted for not having, for not getting rid of your errors. You can't downplay that reality of hey, this book had a good story, but it was ultimately trashed because the writer didn't hire an editor. They're gonna say hire an editor, but what they really mean is they didn't either hire an editor or do the editing themselves in a much cleaner fashion. So I think that there's room for criticism, but I think that at the other end there's too much criticism going on, and people should give indie authors a break to the same point that we give traditionally published books the same break, where we just go, oh, they goofed, that's it.
Written off because preconceived notions. Number 5 is, and the number 5 hot take of the day, get ready for it, is fans are always right and creators should do as we say. Culture is toxic.
That's weird.
I've been seeing this conversation happen a lot more recently. One of them was with a headline that I have no idea if it was true or not, but it had to do with the Spy Times family mangaka saying something like he doesn't love those characters and it was a side project. Now, I have no idea how legitimate that headline is because I didn't really seek into it, but what I wanted to bring up was the comments section on that, where so many people in the comments are saying, well, the customer is always right. The customer is the one that's paying your bills, so you got to do what we say. And this goes back to like the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle situation, where he wanted to work on something that was not Sherlock Holmes, but the fans only wanted Sherlock Holmes. So he continued writing the series that he didn't want to be working on in order to get paid, because that's all that people wanted. And to some extent, yeah, you don't have to actually purchase anything that the author is doing, or the creator is doing, or the artists are doing that you don't like. But I think that this becomes a very toxic culture when fans are demanding that creators do things for them. And I think that this has only gotten more inflamed in recent years because of the way that arts are being used politically, where you have stuff like the She-Hulk finale that was written specifically to antagonize and insult the detractors. So the arts are not being used for the arts or the storytelling anymore.
I haven't watched the last She-Hulk, I don't think, because I don't remember that exactly, but one thing that I learned, or that, well, yeah, I guess I technically, I guess I did learn it there, was that I work for a company where the owner had like these 21 rules or something like that, whatever. And one of them, which I think was like one of the first, it might have been the first, or it might have been like the second or third, it was one of the earlier ones, was the customer may not always be right, but the customer is the customer. And what that basically meant was we don't subscribe to that belief that the customer is always right. We don't do that. So if the customer's calling you and telling you that it needs to be a certain way, you can tell them, no, it's not going to be that way. Like, I hate to tell you this, sir, but no, and we're not doing that. Because the customer is not always right. But the customer is always the customer. And what that basically was just saying was that, hey, you still should treat them with respect because they are paying our bills, right? You're going to have to tell them the truth. You're going to have to tell them the reality of the situation kind of thing. But don't be overly mean about it. Don't be like, hey, I want a free month. No, shut up, goodbye, click. You don't do that, right? Even though you're not going to give them a free month, just because they made a mistake on their end, kind of thing. You don't tell them blatantly, harshly no, and then hang up on them, right? That'd be messed up. So in the same vein here, the reader isn't always right, but the reader is the reader. So do treat them with a certain amount of respect. This idea that we need to placate the reader, I think, is a very bad idea. I believe very much so in write what you want to write what you want to read as well, right? Like whatever it is that you actually really want to be reading out there, that's what you should be putting out, because that way you inspire other writers who are going to look at your work and they're going to be like, you know what? I like that. I want to emulate that. I want to make my own story that is kind of in the same vein. And then you get more of that kind of stuff that you want to see out there, right? So I write what I want to write, and I write what I want to read. And if people like it, great. If they don't like it, that's unfortunate because I'm not going to get paid, but it's not one of those things where I go, okay, I should change my story to fit what would be, more marketable, let's say. If I found out that what I'm writing isn't marketable, which I think it actually probably is, but if it wasn't, if people were like, let's boycott this or some shit, I wouldn't change that story to placate to them. Now I might choose to do what she just mentioned there. I forgot his name, or Arthur Doyle or something like that. The writer of Sherlock Holmes. I might say, you know what? They don't like this book series that I'm writing right here, so I'm going to switch up. I'm going to write a different book series and see if they like that instead, because I'm not having commercial success with this, which means I'm not getting paid, and I need to put food on the table, so therefore I need to switch up my game here a little bit and go over and do something different. So there is that kind of compromise where you're saying, look, the reader base wants X, I'm producing Y, and they don't want that. They want X, so I got to give them X. But I'm not going to turn my Y series into an X series for them. I'm going to keep that for myself, I guess, since they don't really want it, but I do. And I'm going to make an X series for them so that way they can be placated and they can have what they want while I get my money, right? And then I can keep my other series on the back burner, maybe produce it in the background, and maybe someone else who doesn't have a taste for X and wants Y will get what they want later on.
Used as an insult to someone. And so then now a bunch of people that are followers of things also feel like they have a control or a demand over what the creators are doing, because the creators are directly interacting and saying that we're not making a story specifically just to tell a story, but to interact with the fans. I also remember a couple of years ago, back when Teen Wolf was new-ish on MTV, and a large portion of teenage girl fan base wanted Styles and Derek to be in a romantic relationship, and they were going after the story creators, the story writers, saying, you owe us this, we are your fans, you owe it to us to put these two in a gay relationship. And the same thing happened in Supernatural, with the fans pressuring the writers to do something specific with the characters as opposed to just being fans of the show. And I've seen this sense of entitlement more and more, where people are like, we're fans of your show, thus you owe us to do these things. It's the same thing sometimes on YouTube, where people go, look, I sub to you on YouTube, which means you need to do this thing for me because I've given you my support. Now, it's great if a creator wants to interact with and do things specifically with the viewers in mind, but I think it's another thing for fans of something to suddenly feel entitled to control the creator or author of a certain creative property because they're fans of the work. I think that crosses a line, and I think it's a very difficult situation, because it's not saying that anybody has to like anything and everything that comes out of an author. I like Bret Easton Ellis, but I still have stuff that I'm not going to read from him because I'm just not interested in it. But I'm not going to go to Bret Easton Ellis and be demanding that he write the things that I want to read. I'm there to see his perspective and what it is that he creates, and I'll buy the things that I want, and I won't buy the things that I don't want.
Yeah. So this isn't new. I used to watch wrestling a lot, and a lot of people had those kind of same attitudes, where they had the attitude a lot of times where it was a little different than exactly just like, I'm your fan, so therefore you give me what I want. There's plenty of that going on. But there was a lot of the attitude of like, look, this wrestler has been around for a long time. They deserve to be in the main event now, right? They've been around a long time, and you guys haven't given them the chance. They're a good wrestler. They can do a lot. They're good. They're good on the mic. You should give them the chance to go into the main event, and they deserve that. And we want to see that, so you should give it to us, right? And so I've seen this kind of mentality for a very long time, where people kind of expect to be given what they're asking for because basically because of like financial, like they've been giving financially, right? With books, with TV shows, with that kind of thing, I think that it is highly inappropriate to do that because of the fact that if you really think about it, if you step back from that perspective of like, they owe it to me to give me what I want, the thing is, like, they made this show without your help to begin with, and you really like it, right? So you should just trust in those people who made it to continue to give you stuff that you're going to like, okay? If you have an idea that you think you would really like in the show, and they're not doing that idea, it's possible, almost probable, that they've thought of that idea and they said, that's going to bring problems, we're not going to do it. So I do think that that's a big problem that readers have. I mean, it's basically just an entitlement issue, right? I mean, if you're so entitled to think that you can, just because you can reach out to the author on Twitter or on YouTube or wherever you have the ability to reach them, that you can demand of them this idea that you have, that's really shitty of you. That's just, you're being entitled. And it also kind of puts the author in a weird position too, because technically the idea came from somewhere else. That I've heard this come up from other places. I think movies mainly, or I can't remember where I heard this before. But basically, it's kind of like, if you take that idea and you run with it, that person might have a legal foothold to be like, I deserve compensation because I gave them the idea, right? Like, I presented the idea to them and they made financial gain off the idea. It was my idea. And so therefore they owe me some sort of, they owe me some sort of financial compensation now, right? And it's very possible that they might have had every intention of doing what you wanted down the road, right? They weren't there yet. They're going to build to it and get there eventually. But now they're like, well, shit, we got to scrap it, because now if we ever do it, this person might come back and be like, hey, We gave you that idea, so therefore now, just like you owed me the idea, just like you owed putting it in the show, you now owe me money, right? So you might be putting them in kind of an awkward situation where they can't do the idea, even if they thought of it before, or even if they liked it. They're not able to really do the idea because the idea wasn't theirs to begin with, or at least the origination of the idea is questionable to where you might sue them.
And I'm kind of wondering where this went, instead of just demanding that people meet your expectations and only create what you want them to create. I get that consumers fund the arts by, purchasing into them and supporting them. But isn't there, doesn't it say something messed up to anybody else when consumers or viewers of the content or enjoyers of the content are basically like, you will keep doing this or else we hope that your life is ruined? It's not saying that you have to follow that creator onto a new project, but think of the creators that are like, I've made this into a nice bow and ended it and I'm moving on. And the fans, because they don't want that thing that they really like to end, start going after the author instead of just letting that thing end and getting their rest of their fulfillment from fan fiction, because that's what it's there for, you guys. It doesn't have to just be smut. It can be the continuation of something that has been neatly closed. And stuff can be neatly closed to allow a creator to move on to something else. Yeah. I don't know. This is a complicated subject, and I'd love to hear your opinions on it, but is there some middle ground that we can get that is creators are allowed to move on between the things that they want to do without fans attacking them, at the same time as pleasing fans by creating certain contents and properties and not becoming slaves to that situation where some fans suddenly feel entitled to demand that authors and creators do what they want to do? Because then also that gets into the conversation of okay, so if fans get to yell at creators for what they get to make next with their time and their efforts, then what if you were, say, a fan of Teen Wolf and you didn't like Steric? Now, which of the fan bases are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the Steric fan base, or are you going to listen to the not Steric fan base? Because both of these people now feel the entitlement, because you can't just listen to one. If you listen to the demands of one of them, well, now you owe both of them, right? So, how does this work? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Now,
I would say that this mentality probably comes a lot from like art commissions. So, you think of people on Patreon who do character design, right? So, you maybe you're gonna write a book and you'd like to have someone do an art design, like a book cover for you, and they're going to create the characters, and then you'll have another person, or maybe yourself, will just put the pieces together on your book cover and make your book cover for yourself, something like that, right? You're commissioning that artist to make your characters certain characters look a certain way in a certain art style. So you're saying, I want hyper realism, and the guy needs to have long black hair. He needs to have a beard. You describe what they look like. You describe what they need to, maybe what pose you want them in, that kind of thing. And so you are commissioning that art, and so you deserve, because you're paying for it, you deserve to get as close as to what you're thinking as you can possibly get to, right? I mean, usually most artists have they'll show you the work in progress and be like, hey, here's the outline, here's a little bit of the detail to it. I haven't done any color yet, obviously, but this is the pose, this is kind of how he looks, and you go, I need his eyes to be a little different, I need his hair to be a little different. You kind of give that feedback, and then they make the course corrections, right? But in a TV show, you're not really a TV show or a book. Let's just use a book for the example, right? In a book, they've already produced the product, and then you bought it. You didn't commission the artwork, right? So a book, writing is technically art. It's an art form. You didn't commission that art, right? Someone else did, right? Namely the author, probably, right? So you didn't commission that. You don't have control over it, and you don't really have a way of really dictating what happens. Now, I would say that if you did commission a book, right? If you told someone to write a book for you, and you paid them, you know, like even if you paid them in installments, but you're basically paying them kind of up front or like an as-you-go kind of situation, but you're paying them before they finish, then yeah, I think that you have every right to be like, so I read your rough draft, or I read your outline. I kind of want Sarah to have a bit more agency. I want Dan to do a backflip, whatever, right? Whatever it is that you're asking for. I think that you, at that point, because you are commissioning this book, I think you have every right to ask for changes to be made along the process, for the book to come out the way that you kind of want it to come out, right? Again, you're hiring an artist to do what they do, so you might not get the exact thing that you're asking for, but you should be getting much closer than had they done it all on their own and then you read it and you kind of liked it or whatever, right? But since this is not that, you're not commissioning these books, you're paying for a book that's already been written, and sure, there's story to come. You don't have any right to dictate what happens after. You just don't.
Time to check. Do we have time for the bonus hot take? I need to know. Are we doing bonus hot take?
Yes.
It is confirmed. We're doing bonus hot take. I hope you're ready. I don't think the bonus hot take is quite as spicy as the fan base one. So, bonus hot take. Marketing politics is not marketing the arts, and it's ruining the creative community. In the recent years, especially with hashtag McCulture War, the arts have taken a back seat to instead political pundits pushing forward. In the recent...
I just barely missed it. Political marketing arts destroy art. P.S. You suck if you do this.
In the recent years, especially with hashtag McCulture War, the arts have taken a back seat to instead political pundits pushing forward their latest grift while saying there is nothing else out there that exists but anything coming out of the mainstream studios, and wouldn't you guess it, me. A lot of people just suddenly stepping into the arts, deciding that they are going to create something and then entirely marketing themselves based on their politics while insulting their political opponents. And I don't like this. I think it's destructive to the creative community in general, and I have left and or been kicked out of a number of local creative communities because they have been so politicized by this trash that you can't have opinions that are even different from the group. Also, it kind of ruins a lot of critique groups, because now people are looking at your books or your blurbed stories through their political lens instead of letting you just have a story that might have immoral characters. This kind of goes back to number 2, but it also applies with fiction, is people are bringing now their politics to the way that they analyze stories, and it is... I have seen so much of marking ideas or types of characters as red versus blue and then saying you're not allowed to...
Yeah, so like I mentioned before on that Sarah J. Maas character, like she was doing coke, when I watched those reviews and people were like, and she's just like going kind of wild, she's doing cocaine, it's kind of like, whoa, okay, I guess, you do you. That it did feel a lot like again, like they disagreed with someone doing cocaine, but they didn't want to step on any toes, right? They didn't want to be politically incorrect on people who use cocaine or who party, right? They didn't want to insult anybody. They basically kind of walked on the eggshells around that by going like, whoa, that's crazy, but hey, you know what, you do you. If that's what you like to do, then don't kill me about not doing it myself, but hey, go girl, you get it.
To have that as a main character sort of thing, because it's wrong, and I never want to see my main character be doing that, because I associate that with the blue guys or the red guys.
Yeah, this also kind of comes back to what we mentioned before about having these characters being purely virtuous, is that that virtue kind of changes depending on who the author is, right? But it's still the same problem no matter who's doing it. But where they're basically saying, like, look, this is what's right. This is what everyone should really believe. what's that book called? Iron Widow, where basically, you know, it was the whole society was very, you know, misogynistic, very against women. Women were basically like slaves to a certain degree. And the main character was a feminist, but no one else was. And the question of logic comes up going, where did she learn this? And, you know, you could be like, well, obviously, like, just inherently women deserve to be treated better. Well, yeah, I agree with that. But where did she learn this? Because if you and I grew up in a world where women are treated like dogs, let's say, then we're going to think that that's how women are supposed to be treated, even though it's not true. And we'll probably have a lot of resistance to it at first, but our first encounters of that are going to be when we're children, because that's how the world, if that's how the world really is, then we're going to experience it very early on in our lives, right? And it's not right that they're getting treated like this, but we're not going to know that. We're not going to know that that's wrong, because we're going to see everyone else doing it and going, oh, this must be what we're doing. This must be right. This must be okay. So having the character being correct, like her character was right. The women should not be treated the way that they're being treated. But it broke the immersion in the sense that, well, why does she think this if no one else thinks this, right? And that happens a lot. There's other examples of this besides just that one book, but this happens a lot where these characters are placed into like despotic societies where the norm is not good. Like the norm is bad, and for some reason the main character knows it's not right. Although there's nothing other than the author telling them that it's bad to know that it's bad, right? The world around them is telling them, yes, this is good, this is how it should be. Women are this, men are this, right? Whichever way it goes, whether the men are being made into servitude or the women are, usually it's the women because the female author wants the female protagonist to have to overcome patriarchy. That's very, very common. It breaks the immersion where you go, well, yeah, she's right. Women shouldn't be treated like this, but why does she think that? Who taught her that? Whoever brought up the idea? How did the idea come to her head that women shouldn't be treated like this? Why? And why is she the only one? Where are the other women who wouldn't want to be treated like this, right? So it's one of those things where they're putting their own beliefs into these fantasy fictional worlds, and you're right, but I'm sorry, that belief doesn't fit. That belief has really been you've made a world where that belief has been squeezed out over, I don't know how much time you've made, but maybe it's 100 years, maybe it's 1,000 years. Over time, that belief that your main character has been squeezed out with an iron fist by the patriarchy, that this is how it should be. So there's really no reason that this idea should be coming up, other than your personal views, other than your personal beliefs there. And there's a lot of other books that do this in a much lighter way, because obviously not every single book is about a dystopian future or dystopian past or whatever it is, dystopian fantasy, where it's all like, against the women kind of thing. There are other ones where, you can just clearly tell what this person is. It's kind of like the putting in a lesson in a way, right? You feel like you're getting clubbed over the head with some of these like tropes and some of these like themes that are moving away from being a theme and moving into being a lesson, right? And like other characters are learning their lesson kind of thing, right? Like, misogyny's bad, and it's like, well, yeah, you're right, but did we need to have like 10 pages of dialogue explaining that to another character who is you're basically just saying it to us, the reader? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's all that really was you were just saying that to us. But sure, you were saying it to Billy in the story, but I mean, really, we were reading it.
And creative circles are becoming very close-minded.
Yeah, this does stifle creativity a lot because people are having to walk on eggshells.
In the current era, and I don't like it, and I don't like that the political enthusiasts, let's go with that, will claim that they care about the arts because their favorite political pundit now suddenly cares about the arts, but then we'll go into the political space and literally stomp on the creative people that are there, who have been there, and say, fuck you, how come nobody knows about you if you're so great? Nobody said that us on the side that are being creatives are great, but y'all said that you care about creatives, and then you come into the creative space with your political flags and then crush us all, leave trash, and then leave after destroying all of the relationships that we had because you injected politics. All I'm saying is it's destructive, it's not helpful, and can we stop marketing politics as culture? Also, anybody out there, and the side issue, literally, of these political pundits saying the only things that exist are Marvel and DC and Netflix and Amazon, while ignoring all of the creators that have been around for decades, doing things on the side, getting ignored by the big players, and the political pundits will still say nobody is making art, and art is entirely stagnant, and culture is entirely stagnant, while ignoring all of the artists that are not the mainstream. Yeah. There's stuff out there, guys. There is so much incredible art out there by people that you've never heard of because you don't go looking, but it's there. Take a look every once in a while. I'm not specifically talking about me, but I am an option. So with that said, those are...
Yeah, I would basically agree with that. Just the sense of, you know, people, like she said, stomping into the space who were told by the person that they listen to online, kind of thing, to go read a book for the first time, and they go into the space, and they don't like a book because it has different views than they believe in, and so therefore it's trash and garbage and whatever. Again, it's one of those entitlement things, right? They believe that
my 5 writing culture hot takes for right now. Let me know what some of yours are down in the comments below. Let me know some of your thoughts on the above. I know. I'm a fucking idiot. Everybody says so, but that is my brand. Hope to have some interesting conversations or hear some interesting thoughts down below. Please keep it civil. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
All right. So I must be an idiot too then, because I didn't really disagree with much or anything that she said. I think I expounded upon some of the things. I think we might have had a little bit of different take in the very beginning. But for the most part, we agreed on just about everything. So, yeah, that's where I stand on that.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer.
You say that.
For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine.
Oh, shit. All right, well, that's what I think on that as far as the hot takes go. Yeah, I guess I'm an idiot too. Who knew? All right, guys, well, I appreciate you being here. Until next time, happy writing.